All right, let's move on to his second film. This one really put him on the map. It is, of course, 1995's Seven,
Yeah.
a film that many still consider to be his best or one of his very best. Brendan, where do you sit on Seven?
Oh, we have a new number one on our
We
list.
got a new number one. Yes, doesn't take much there to beat
It
Alien
doesn't
Three,
take
but
much. I feel like we're at the point now where we're not going to be disagreeing on anything until we get to, I don't know what film it'll be. But Seven's not that film. I think this film is. I think this film is great. This it's weird. We often talk about comparisons a lot, right? How we sometimes see a film, we want to try and compare it to something else to try and define how good it is, right? And I feel like
Mhm.
Seven gets compared a lot to The Silence of the Lambs, which I sort of get, but the movie I often think about when comparing Seven to anything else is Blade Runner. And like
Mhm.
because there's something weirdly dystopian about it. It's always got this rainy backdrop until the very end when everything is clear as day, and that's kind of the most ironic time to have everything so crystal clear and beautiful when the most
Yeah,
unbeautiful thing is about to happen.
yeah. Love that
um,
irony. That's good
I, I
stuff there.
I do too, but the sense of place here feels very dystopian, very raw, very dilapidated, very ugly.
Hmm.
It's a film that it urges you to feel sick to your stomach,
Hmm.
which means I don't often watch it. but
Hmm.
I will say, if I ever encounter a friend of mine who loves movies and wants a good thriller and they've never seen this movie, boy, am I going to show them this one, and I'm going to be watching their expression the entire way, especially during that sloth scene. Oh God, that'll be seared into my brain forever.
Yes. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
it's a very good film. In many ways, Fincher's unofficial debut of sorts, because this really is the first Fincher-esque
Yeah, it's
Fincher
the
film.
true introduction to Fincher for sure.
Yeah, it's very good. I think it's one of his best.
I agree. No, I'm completely with you. It's extremely dark. It's creepy. The psychological terror at the core of this film is absolutely remarkable.
Hmm.
And I love how much of its sinister qualities through a lot of the film linger quietly. Like this is a film that is more methodical and quiet than I think its reputation would suggest because you think of its more horrific moments, such as the aforementioned sloth scene or what we see at the end with the box. But
Yeah.
this is a film that, while uncompromising, takes its time in some ways. It really lets those sinister qualities breathe. And I think that's why it's ultimately very affecting, especially when you consider these performances. Do you like where does this rank among Brad Pitt's career as far as performance goes? Is
I
this top three?
No, I don't know if it's top three for me. There are other performances of his I think I prefer. If
Okay.
I have any, I don't want to say knock, but if I have any questions about the film, I sometimes go back to his performance in the very end of Seven, and I think, are there? I don't know. Because I've never been through what that character goes through to know if that performance is as accurate as it could be. But there are other performances from Brad Pitt I think I might put above this, but that's not to disregard the performance he's giving here. I think where it's at its best is when he's at his most cocky, and then how that's juxtaposed by the almost like this cynicism when he and Somerset some time to just simply talk about their respective morals and how they play into this mystery at hand. And there's also the moment that they have with Tracy, Mills's wife, and how she plays into that
Hmm.
dynamic as well. I think in those moments, Brad Pitt is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Uh,
Well, I a little disparity then here, even on
mm,
Seven, and maybe this could impact where the film ultimately lies in our overall ranking at the end.
okay,
Because I do think this is one of Brad Pitt's best. I don't know where
okay.
it ranks. I don't know if it's top three.
Well,
Probably
that
top
that was
five
the
worst
question. I
at
I
worst for
really
me.
like his performance here, but yeah, I mentioned top three, and I think, man, I love him in Ocean's 11. I love him in his small role in Thelma and Louise. I really love as well. He's a good actor. He's a
Hmm.
Moneyball. I think he's really great in Moneyball.
Moneyball's great. Um, Ad Astra is top three for me, hands
I will
down.
say I do prefer him here over Fight Club. I know we haven't talked about Fight Club yet, but
Hmm.
and that's not to knock his performance on Fight Club. I don't want to play that trump card too early or anything like that,
Yeah.
but I do like him a little bit more here than in Fight Club.
Yeah. And I'm posing the question. I didn't even wrestle with this coming into the conversation. I'm just curious. So, thinking off the cuff here, Ad Astra, I love. Moneyball, certainly in the conversation. There's not too many that I would take over this. This worst case, it's top five, but it might even be top three for me. And part of it, while I do agree with you about what comes before the ending,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that it's almost a meme now, the whole what's in the box, but I think his deterioration there upon that revelation is nothing short of horrifying and heartbreaking. The way he demonstrates fear and anxiety and disbelief is utterly devastating. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's quintessentially cathartic. And I don't know if he could have handled that moment any better, especially
Mm-hmm.
for where he was as an actor at that time. Maybe if you give him 25 more years of experience, perhaps he handles it differently. But I don't know if I need those years of experience to define that character in that moment. I wanted something raw and honest for someone, given his talent and where he was at that time,
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
convey what that character would in that moment. I think he was the perfect choice for that moment, and the distraught that he
It
embellishes there is just it's perfect. It's
yeah,
perfection.
and maybe any questions I have about it are less on his performance and more so the overall tone that the film is evoking simultaneously. Like the way the music ramps up Howard Shore's score there. It's just a- and that's not a knock. It's just there's so many different conflicting tones happening that maybe it inadvertently conflates the performance into something that it's not. So it's a
Perhaps.
weird thing.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of it. Um, uh, it almost makes me want to see this film again, but witness the ending with no music whatsoever. I'd be curious to see how the impact lands. If I weirdly think it
Okay.
might even be more impactful, honestly. Uh,
Maybe. Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
and that, that's where we could have a discussion about Fincher being, as you noted earlier, essentially a first time filmmaker, at
yeah.
least first time getting to really do this without, a troubled
Well,
production and a whole bunch of
and
interference. So,
and that's where I think his later films get so interesting because something we talk about a lot regarding Fincher is how meticulous he is with crafting the perfect shot, right? And I was trying to think like, what's the perfect word to describe Fincher as a filmmaker? And I looked at my own screen while we're recording this on StreamYard, and I look behind me. I've got this bass guitar here. This is called a precision bass. That's the name of this bass.
mhm.
And I think precision is the perfect name or perfect word to describe his filmmaking style because that's what he's so precise. And I feel like he would find that precision a little bit more as he went along. But as
Mhm.
far as just achieving that thrill and really hitting
Yeah.
you with what he's capable of, I do think Seven
Yeah.
is one of his best films in that regard.
I agree because the effect he really wants to convey there is how disturbing and dark it
Yeah.
is. You mentioned that it's in broad daylight. And there's, of course, the irony that his meltdown there is exactly what John Doe is wanting out of the game. And that's the only reaction he can give because who to react any differently would be inhuman. But that's where
Mm-hmm.
that film I think is just from a psychological terror perspective, it's impeccable. And a lot of
Oh
that
yeah,
is the writing for sure, but I
yeah.
think the performances elevate that in some really fantastic ways. Perhaps some of it is framing and the scores you're talking about, and maybe that's a little inconsistent. I don't know if I share that, but I could see that
Well, yeah. I
as a
will say
criticism.
one thing that makes the ending sting as much as it does is the fact that after all of this happens, it just ends.
It just ends.
Nothing
Yeah,
else after that. Apparently,
yeah.
there was a deleted scene or some type of deleted ending that was shot between these two characters in like an interrogation room.
Uh-huh.
Thank God that was not included.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
think we need that. And I
No.
kind of wonder, I don't know if this is true, but do you think some of that is born out of watching Brad Pitt's performance and how flailing he is there, how human and devastating it is, and in the editing room thinking, I don't need anything else. This is
Well,
it. This
it's
is my
more.
ending.
I think it's more so Morgan Freeman as to
And
why it
Freeman,
ends the
both
way.
of them,
Yeah.
honestly,
Yeah.
how both of them react there.
It's really that final exchange that Morgan Freeman has with Arlie Ermy, where he just says simply, "I'll be around. I'll be
Hmm.
around."
Yeah.
That moment there, and then that last line, which is a little bit obvious, that voiceover where he says, "How this world is worth fighting for, and that it's a great world," but he only agrees with that one part that it's a terrible world or something, or that it's a
Yeah.
world worth fighting for. A little obvious, but it
Yeah.
just the fact that the movie just ends just kind of maintains that poisonous sting that this movie is going
Yeah.
for, which is what I really like about it.
Yeah. All right. All of that said, Seven is our new number one.
And it's going to
Okay.
stay number one, even with this next film we're going to talk about.
Let's talk about 1997's The Game. This is going to be interesting. I'm so fascinated to see where this goes. What do you think
Okay.
about The Game?
I think this movie's kind of fun.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think it's a fun movie. I don't think it's one of Fincher's best movies, though. And I think this is where watching any director's films in order of release can sometimes be both a great thing, but also kind of an annoying thing, because following Seven with The Game, it almost feels like backpedaling, because it is such a more minimalistic feeling film when compared to Seven, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think what makes The Game so fascinating is kind of the game-like trickery of its narrative. I think it is a very fun movie, primarily because Michael Douglas has a lot of fun with it. Like,
Hmm.
I tend to see The Game more as like this comedic thriller, all things. And when I look at it in that light, I have a lot more fun with it. Which is my way of saying, of the three films we're talking about, it's clearly my number two between Seven, Alien 3, and this one. Like, this is my number two of the three we're going to be talking about thus far right now. But I do think it's a very fun film. It's just not one of his best, if you ask me.
Okay. So I am going to champion this a little bit. I really
Okay.
like this film a lot.
Okay.
It's not top tier Fincher. I do agree there. But I do find it to be one of his most thematically provocative, or at least interesting to me. And I feel like it isn't talked about enough. People will talk about its rules, the game itself, how hokey it might be. And there's certainly a lot of fun to be had, even if it gets a little weird at times. But what I
Mm-hmm.
find so compelling and poignant about the film is that in order for Nicholas to get closure from the trauma that has experienced as it relates to his father, he had to end up exactly like him, had to end up exactly like his father.
Sure.
And again, some people might find that a little bit hokey, but the truth is, once Nicholas decided to become like his father, he was transformed. If you had the opportunity to engage in therapy and jump off a roof, but you knew you would survive, that would not change you. It wouldn't,
Mm-hmm.
because you knew what was going to happen.
It's the action of knowing you won't survive. That's the
Exactly.
knowledge of that is what changes you.
Exactly. There would be no real lasting impact if it was nothing more than an amusement park ride. Nicholas jumped off that roof thinking he was going to die, knowing he was going to die. And that's the difference. That's where he got to be reborn, so to speak. And that type of transformation, I do think, is provocative. So say what you will about the plotting of the film and the contrived turns it may take you narratively, but I do
Yeah.
think that in terms of what it all means in the end, emotionally, thematically, the arc of Nicholas, what he becomes, I do think that is actually very moving and thought provoking. And I think the film has a lot to offer in that regard that just isn't talked
Yeah.
about enough. And I think that's
No.
handled with sharp diligence and Fincher's storytelling and in the performance at the core of this film by Michael Douglas, who is so good here.
Yeah.
And that to me puts this in the middle of the pack for Fincher, for me.
And it sounds like we're not too far off on this movie. We maybe just latch on to different things as to why we both really like it, because the thing I love the most about the film is its sense of humor. I really do think this is a very funny movie.
Yeah,
There's
sure.
there's a line in this movie where someone says to my Douglas's character that you're a brain fetishist. Like it's like lines like that. It's a very funny movie, which is why I'm actually
Mhm.
able to get on board with many contrivances and its plot conveniences, because it almost feels like they're in on the joke in some ways.
Yeah.
So I think it's also appropriate that the film literally ends with a joke on a T-shirt, as if to suggest that
Yeah.
the film was kind of a joke in some ways, but
Yeah,
it
I
doesn't
agree.
take away from the fact that there is still thematic that is there that you're latching on to. And I just find the film so entertaining. I really
It
do.
is
I think it's a
entertaining.
very
I
fun
agree.
movie.
So at this point, we have it at number 2.
So between the three films, Seven, The Game, Alien 3.
Okay. I think we can agree there as we move
Yeah.
on to 1999's Fight Club. All right, where do you have Fight Club?
Probably the most dangerous film you can ever talk about.
Yeah.
I like this movie a lot. I really do. It's not for Fincher for me though.
Oh boy, here we go.
Well, I think for the most part, for most of its runtime, it is. I think what's really interesting about the film is maybe not so much on the film itself. It's the fact that it's been kind of misinterpreted over the years. It kind of fits
Yeah.
into the same category of something like Scarface, right?
Sure.
Which has been appreciated and interpreted for perhaps the wrong reasons. The thing is, I think the movie is aware of that, which is what I think is so fascinating and predictive about the movie, is the way it plays into that machismo as kind of a problem, and it became kind of a byproduct of that. Like that's such an interesting like irony with the movie that I just cannot help but appreciate. It's a movie that tries to have it both ways, and like as this critique and celebration of anarchy and machismo and e-commerce, predating the whole like Amazon craze, right?
Yeah, sure.
And I think by trying to have it both ways, it most succeeds at that, which I think is really fascinating. If anything, I think the final 20 minutes are just kind of sloppy. Like that's really the
Okay.
only problem with it. And I don't have a problem with the reveal. I don't have a problem with what it's suggesting thematically or what it's going about saying, but I think it's one of those cases where a big reveal happens and things just try to rush along to get to the ending. And I think the pacing just completely in a way that I think kind of detrimental to the movie. So
Okay.
that's really my only issue with it, which is why it's of the movies we've talked about so far, I definitely prefer Seven over Fight Club. Uh, but I think I'll still put it over The Game because what it is doing, I find a little bit more fascinating. So it is a very good film, but I
Mhm.
wouldn't go as far as to say it's like one of my favorites of the 1990s, if that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think that we would get canceled if I put The Game above this?
I mean, you would get canceled.
Okay.
I'm
Fair
not
enough.
putting it above The Game. I mean, I do like it more than The Game. I think it is. I think those first two acts, especially of Fight Club, are too good that I would have to put it above The Game. Even though I think The Game weirdly sticks the landing a little bit more interestingly for me.
Literally.
Yeah, literally. Okay, literally as well. So yeah, the majority of Fight Club works more for me, which is why I put it above The Game.
Okay,
But
I will say this.
I'm not gonna push back too much on you because in totality the game has a lot of interest on its mind.
Look, I think you can make an argument that Fight Club, it is a more seamless experience in terms of it having less contrivances narratively. Although I don't know if it has as many rules. There's only one rule here. Obviously, we all know that.
Yeah, we're not gonna say it.
The game has more rules that maybe it sticks to
Are
at
meant
times,
to be
maybe it doesn't.
broken.
Yeah, exactly. That are meant to be broken. And I think the game, and I do mean this genuinely, I think the game is a more fascinating film thematically. I do.
Mhm.
I really do believe that.
Okay,
And
interesting.
part of that comes down to what you're talking about in terms of the film being misinterpreted over the years. Its messages on consumerism and masculinity are a bit obvious. I don't know if they're all that interesting. Its ideas on self destruction are more interesting. And I do want to give Ryan and Jay some credit because when they talked about this on that extra film series they did, was that last year? Whenever they did that series, they
I
did
forget.
talk about
Maybe
that
maybe 2 years
specifically.
ago, actually.
2 years ago? Yeah, I guess it was quite a while ago.
Yeah.
But they did talk about that pretty thoroughly as far as its ideas on self-destruction being a lot more compelling than the consumerism stuff. That, maybe it was a little bit ahead of its time, but I think it's a little hollow and superficial. I do love that
That's fair.
Fincher is aware that he's giving people what they want in terms of the drama and the tension here, the Fight Club of it all, only to pull the rug out from under them. That I do really like. And again, I think there's a seamlessness to that. There's still an artfulness to it all and how he crafts the film, how he structures the film, the timing of when he pulls that rug. All of that is handled with great diligence. And so I think you can make the argument that, yeah, it's a better crafted movie than the game. And
Yeah.
it's more sharp in its direction. Maybe the performances are certainly a little bit more loud and bombastic, and maybe they're a little bit more nuanced, although I don't know if I agree with that. But I could understand the argument. But I truly think Michael Douglas of the two films, if we're just comparing the two, I think gives the best singular performance out of the two. And I think the thematic ideas of the game are
Yeah.
also more provocative and nuanced if we're just talking about those two films. What this comes down to is the prominence of Fight Club. Do I want to get canceled? And is Fight Club as dense and as nuanced as maybe some people claim it to be? I don't know. Yes and no, I would say.
That I think that's what's fascinating about Fight Club is that it is yes and no to that question, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that yes and no can swap where those answers are, right? Like it's like sometimes I might watch the movie and think, oh, these ideas on consumerism are so old hat, like they're not offering anything. And then I watch it again and think, but for 1999, they were kind of predictive. So it's like it's
Yeah.
kind of like it's kind
a
of a
little bit of
double-edged sword.
both. To be
Yeah.
fair, yes. I don't want to just talk about it in hindsight in the perspective of 2020 or 2023 now, but
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah.
It was a little predictive, and I do like the sleight of hand.
Yeah.
As far as the last 20 minutes go, I'll be honest, I haven't seen this film in quite a while. I'd have to give it a watch to speak to that specifically. I don't have those memories, but
Well,
maybe on a rewatch through
you,
the eyes of 2023 and who I am now, maybe I would agree with you. I
as
don't know. It's
talk
hard to
about
say.
you know what I think it is? I think it's one of those movies that it doesn't succeed in the way that, let's say, something like M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense does, where
Sure.
that reveal, the more you watch the film, you could still find something profound and moving and tricky about that reveal at the end, right?
Yes. Yes.
Whereas with Fight Club, for me, I think the film mostly works if you don't know that that twist is coming. And when you know it and you rewatch it, for me, it's also kind of like The Usual Suspects, right? There's something kind of deflating when I go back and watch that film knowing how it's going to end. I don't know if the film properly builds its proper narrative around that reveal as much as I think it could. Which is, I think, a little bit unfortunate, because I think what comes before it is very fascinating. Now, I will say, with the 4 films we've talked about in this collective ranking thus far, in a weird way, I'm kind of tempted to put it below The Game just to see what the hell happens.
I mean, look, I
do like it more than The Game. I will say that, but I mean, the whole point of the movie is to try and challenge the norm, to try and challenge conformity. So maybe I'm doing the film a service by placing it somewhere where it doesn't belong.
But how much meaning is behind that, which is where it gets interesting, because I don't know if that ethos is as strong as people claim it to be. Maybe it is. I don't know. I'd have to rewatch the film, but like, I kind of go back and forth on it, because
I did. Yeah, the last time I did watch it was a few years ago, and it was one of those films where, because we talk about films aging gracefully or aging poorly,
Yeah.
and Fight Club does both, sometimes in the same scene.